Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for what is part two of our podcast on the Dataverse and M365. With us today, I'm Joe Gig Werks, and with me is Christian Holzlin, enterprise architect here at Gig Werks. So, last podcast we talked about the evolution of M365, how it became this coherent stack, and with it, the constant extension of making it a really integrative platform to build business solutions. And the thing that Microsoft has always excelled at is keeping their eye on the one reason why you want to use technology is for ROI, right? Is to drive business objectives. So, Christian, two things I'd like to do today, if you don't mind. One is if you can just give a quick summary of some of the highlights of the Dataverse again, just in case anybody didn't listen to our first podcast or just as a refresher. And then what I thought would make a lot of sense is, so the Dataverse, great, we've discussed it. What's the practical application? What can you do with it that would have like real ROI and maybe a use case or two that you could describe just to put everything in context?
Perfect. Thanks, Joe, for the intro. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on our podcast. So, the Dataverse is really a cloud data store, and that's kind of a simple way of describing it. But what it allows you to do is if you're familiar with on-prem data, you used to have to install a server, and then you'd define tables, and you'd have to create databases and worry about file structure and all this stuff. And there was a lot more overhead to getting a database server up and running and all that stuff. So what the Dataverse intends to do is to replace that whole data backend experience and essentially make it a sort of a platform as a service now. So you have access to this data storage mechanism as a first class integration to everything that's in the M365 stack. Like, for example, there's Power Apps and Power Automate, two of the main application building components in M365. Those have connectors that go right into the Dataverse. So you can read and write data into and from your application as a first class connection, right? Before you'd have to use like ADO.NET or something like that. And there was a lot more overhead. So the Dataverse abstracts all that out for you, and it gives you a nice built-in designer. So you can create tables and relationships and all kinds of different data types are available to you, and it gives you the opportunity now to build that out without having to like set up your own server and things like that. And that's really what its core function is, and it does it very well. It's been out for a little while, and it's quite stable.
So with that, Christian, in summary, just for my own benefit, so the ROI of the Dataverse generally, like not even with a specific use case is, there's always a reason in terms of the development of business solutions to connect data. And in olden times, if you will, that was pretty laborious. Contention one fair. A lot to write, a lot to map through.
Right. You have to do RM mapping. You have to write your own data provider. You have to worry about the authentication, the security, the service itself. Right. There's a lot of overhead when
And
you're talking about.
So the Dataverse then is essentially, as you put it, it's its own platform, connecting information out of the gate across the M365 application landscape,
Right. And it
moving all
does it
that overhead.
exactly. Yeah. So it gets rid of the overhead, and also, it operates as a first class integration. Right. So it's not third party. It doesn't require customizations. You can plug and play right away out of the gate. That's its big selling point, and that's the biggest ROI. The time to market is instantaneous. There's no startup costs or startup time, and the other good thing about it is if you have team members or you work with consultants who know and understand data and SQL and things like that, there's little to no training time on top of that as well, right? So they did a really good job of making it easy to adopt and quick to bring online.
Right. And so that's part of the value prop as well, right? ROI has many
Many
dimensions.
facets, right?
Right,
Exactly.
right. And
Yeah.
not the least of which is time to value.
That's right. That's a big one. A lot of people, they want something done now, and especially if you have executives or you have C-class level folks who are placing tight demands on an organization. That tooling allows you to be very flexible and quick in your approach to building out applications. And so it's one of the tools in your toolbox that you want to make sure you take advantage of when you're building data-driven applications.
Right. And if you're going to be bothered to build something, speed to market is everything. And that's something I've just seen, in my couple of decades or plus working within the industry is frequently it just takes too long to get out the door, and by the time it does, the requirements have changed, and you kind of never get anywhere. If you got to spend all day and all night setting up plumbing, you never get to take a bath. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I'll stick with it. All right, so now you have the Dataverse, and you have something that's going to expedite your ability to roll out a high value, high return on investment solution. Can you give us a couple of use cases where you could see this applied and what the value might be?
Yeah, one of our favorite use cases that we'd like to bring up that we're going to focus on for this podcast session today is the chatbot. And the reason why we've been talking about this use case for so long, we discuss it with our clients and it comes up in conversation, things like that, is we see, it's one of those things that has a very easy to calculate ROI, and it's one of the fastest things that you can turn around in your organization because all of the tooling that you need to build it is already accessible to you if you have an M365 tenant. There's certain licensing involved in it, which we can go into, but if you have, Power Automate and you have the Dataverse and you have Teams, you can pretty much build a chatbot that can automate something for you that might currently take, 15 minutes of your time, right? Now, it's hard to, how do you make that case for the ROI, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So if you're a small organization, you have a few people, and you're saving a little bit of time on something, it might not be that cost effective. But when you're a larger institution, or if you have a few hundred people and you want to, automate access to even something as simple as like an employee directory, where you just open up your Teams chatbot, you type in somebody's name and it just automatically sends you their contact information. If you have 5,000 people in your organization and it takes everybody 5 minutes to find somebody's contact info, right? It's a very easy ROI calculation. And there are, there's a plethora of these different kinds of use cases. There's, scenarios where you might be creating boilerplate language for contracts, right? And you have somebody who's generating a document, they're pulling from a template, and then they're copying it into a SharePoint document library and all that stuff, and then they're plugging in a client name. So if you have that data, especially if you have like a CRM, for example, you can pull that data, into the Dataverse or use the Dataverse if you have it in a data-driven application, and then just type in a client's name and say, I need a SAL for, such and such. And you can use the chatbot to kick off a Power Automate flow that pulls, requisite data in from the Dataverse and then generates a document with boilerplate contract template that has the name of a client in it, right? And that can happen in literally 30 seconds or less, right? So if it's taking you 15 minutes to do that right now, it's hard to imagine that being even faster. But the chatbot is really the fastest way that you could automate literally any process in your organization. And Joe, I'm sure you can think of some other types of scenarios where that could be applicable even to you. You work on the sales side, you do a lot of contract stuff. Pushing paperwork is one of those things where the chatbot is extremely useful because you can turn stuff around in, more or less instantaneously.
And you can trigger a workflow too, correct? So I can say, exactly, right. Hey, go, because like in our other company, we have a document generation capability a little bit. If I understand correctly, we could go, please, look up this client, please create a contract for it, and it will run the wizard for us, for instance, even though that's already a few clicks, even a few less clicks. And just on the quick math side, because we are focused on ROI, so I just took some quick metrics. If you have a 15-minute task a day, you got 100 people doing it, that's 1,500 minutes, it's 25 hours, 52 weeks, 1,300. And if their rate is like $75 an hour, you're spending about $97,000 on this 15-minute task across your organization. If you got that down to 5, you're spending 32. So you're in the money in 4 months, and that is a very rapid ROI in terms of efficiency. And to the point you were making earlier, you go, oh, what's 15 minutes? It's 15 minutes times 100.
Right,
100
exactly.
employees,
That's the
which
question,
is
right?
60 minutes is 25 hours, 52 weeks, 1,300, and you just do the math through. And that's when you really go, aha, it's the little things. People do these 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute jaunts across a day, across a week, and that really adds up. And the notion that you're doing things old school, not in a good way, as I always put it, the 90s have moved on. This is where you really start to look at the opportunity of that coherent M365 universe being driven by the Dataverse.
Right, by the Dataverse. And this ties into the narrative that we've been pushing for so long, is that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole.
Yep.
When you can bring in, chatbots are great and they can get you fast information, but how do you get the data into the critical locations like a contract, right? Well, you need the Dataverse, right? And you need Power Automate to do the generation of the document, and you need SharePoint to have the template in a document library. You bring all those components together, and now you can generate a boilerplate statement of work from a chatbot in 30 seconds, right? And it's all of those pieces working together in tandem that give you that that ROI.
Absolutely. And this is something we spoke about earlier podcast, I guess about a year or so ago. A mantra for me is people got to get their head out of thinking, oh, I'm going to write a workflow, I'm going to write a form. They got to write a business solution, right? It's not, I'm going to write a workflow. You're going to write a solution which has all those parts if it's going to have medium and high ROI for the business. And I would argue also that the other thing about the Dataverse, what it lets you do, another thing that's core to our practice we excel at, is executing things in an agile fashion and managing the budget. If you can quickly spin together prototypes, for instance, so go back to your earlier thing where you're writing ADO.NET and all these other components you have to run, but by the time you have it written, the scope might have changed. The use case might have changed. Being able to go, well, look, I have all that plumbing done. Does it not facilitate an agile approach to development of that business solution by not having to worry about that plumbing?
Well, and I've seen that in numerous occasions. I mean, that story repeats itself in a lot of the projects we do. We see teams struggling with the data access on the back end. And how do you wire it up, or how do you get access to it, or what's the security model, or all those things, right? The integration of the M365 platform and having that all together means that that's all handled for you automatically, right? So if you're a licensed user and you have access to an app, then all you have to do as a developer of that app is then go in and say, well, this person should see these tables, right? And that's it, right? It's that simple. You don't have to worry about the physical security of the server, any of that stuff. So you can turn those things around much more quickly, and you're focusing on learning, as an implementation resource, you're focusing on learning the technical aspects of the platform and how to bring those to bear for your company, rather than the overhead of the sort of lights on side of it, right? Which is why cloud computing is becoming so popular, right? It's because once you remove the need for your resources to need the skill sets for that lights on kind of stuff, right? They're focusing their time and energy, your money, your investment, you're paying them, their employees, right? They're focusing on the tech, right? They're focusing on the technology. They're increasing the ROI to you just by virtue of you using the platform.
Right. And it allows another thing that we're always very big on, for institutions to start looking at the development of solutions as if they're a company. In other words, really, put it this way, it frees up time to get the use case right. It frees up the ability to, God forbid, do documentation. Another thing that we do a very good job at, and see time and time again, poor documentation by vendors or internal resources. So if you can take the time to get a tight use case and really document fully what that solution is that you built, that's another value that you have, a soft value, but a really demonstrable one, because you can't scale going forward. If everything is like you threw all your work into just getting the baseline set up and all that plumbing set, and then you're in a rush, and that's typically when people forget. to do the detail. Don't have the time for the detailed use case and blow off detailed documentation. Bit of a digression, but it's a better use of time. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Well, and it frees up your resources to spend that time on that documentation.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, because now you've taken away the overhead of all the the platform support. You're like, well, we don't have to worry about the server being down, or we can't log into it, or whatever the case may be. Right. So you can use that time that you've recouped to enhance the quality of your business applications by keeping that documentation there. And flushing out those use cases and really understanding, what the business process is. Because that's the most important thing to note is when everything is a business process. Everything is a use case from start to finish.
Right.
The way we used to think about it when we were all, on-prem and, everything was basically a tool, an appliance. Like, we had a thing for this. We had an Office plugin to do this thing, or we had this or that, right? Those days are starting to go away now, right? You have a process. People have a role in your organization. They do something, and that process needs to be implemented in a way that facilitates them being able to do that in the most cost-effective manner. And chatbots, we really kind of see as the new frontier for that, because they can apply to any discipline. That's the fun thing about them, right? You can apply them to an employee directory. You can apply them to contract lifecycle management, right? When you're generating boilerplate contracts. You could apply them to, we were meeting with a company recently, and they were telling us about a customer service use case that they had where they want customer profile data in a pinch, right? And what we're hearing consistently across the board from all of our customers and prospective customers who are interested in this technology is that it's all about getting access to critical data faster. There's two components to that. Critical data, right? That's where the Dataverse comes in, right? Your critical data needs to be in a critical space where it's secure and safe, easy to access, and where your team who's doing the development isn't responsible for lights on support and understanding the complexities of back-end security, right? This person needs access to this data table. Great, done, right? Simple, right? That's Dataverse, right? And then quickly, right? That's where the chatbot comes in. Chatbots are incredibly easy to set up. Once you know what you're looking for, it's simply a matter of typing in the keywords and the topics that people are going to ask you about, and then writing the responses to those, right? And that can be in the form of a chat message. It can be in the form of an email. It can be in the form of a document that gets generated with the Power Automate flow, and then you send it to them in their mailbox. There are so many ways to make that information accessible. You could send them a hyperlink, right? You could send them an action card in Teams where they click on a link to go to a site that has, a profile on it, right? So you can leverage existing data points that you have, and you can front end that with a chatbot. And now you're talking about business critical access to information in a pinch. And that's the holy grail, right? Because if everyone at your company is doing their jobs instantaneously, you've maximized your ROI across the board, right? And so that's why we talk about this so much. This is where we see kind of the future of digital transformation is in this sort of automated, chat workspace where you need something, you go to a bot for it, it sends it to you automatically, and then you work with one of your colleagues to do that information work around what that's supposed to be, right? Looking at assumptions and more qualitative analysis, things like that. But the stuff, that like administration stuff, that's all going to be automated at some point.
Right, and then you'll be able to speak to it as well. And actually, I was thinking before we wrap up, Christian, I know that we're going to be bringing to the Microsoft Marketplace a sort of ready-to-go solution for our clients that we think has value. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, definitely. Let me talk about that a little bit. So what we're bringing to the marketplace is essentially a turnkey chatbot solution, which allows you to, kind of dip your toes into the water a little bit without having to jump in all the way. But what it's going to do is it's, a very price competitive offering where we work with you to turnkey a chatbot solution for a given work topic that is, business critical to your organization. We'll work with you on getting the topics authored and making sure that you understand what the needs are to make that as most efficient as possible, and then actually build it out for you in your production environment so that you can start using it, put it into UAT, have your team start working with it, and get an idea of what the value is of a chatbot without having to jump in and do something that's, like a very large endeavor, right? This is a nice sort of like small, easy to get going on thing where you'll see the value very quickly. We like to use the term low hanging fruit. But in this case, chatbots really are in this sense, because once you enable the feature in M365, it's simply a matter of going in and telling it how to respond to certain key phrases, getting that information out of your organization, and then sending it to the right people at the right time. And that's really what we want to do with this offering.
And this solution also, I think, tell me if you disagree, just having something built end to end with obvious, supporting documentation, I think sets the stage for um, clients and firms to go, oh, okay, so this is something working. This is how it works, to help drive their own initiatives internally as to what's possible, and even as to what they can build on their own.
Exactly. And it's hard to be an early adopter without having a precedent out
Right,
there
exactly.
already, right? So what this will do is it will give you something to bring to your leadership and say, hey, here's this was a very modest cost implementation, and look at the ROI that we got from this. And that will help not only just you champion your own platform internally, but also it will set the standard going forward for what should you expect to see and do if you build out more of these, or if you move into this technology realm. If you want to start adopting this more, what's the right way to do it, right? It kind of sets that standard for you.
All right. Well, thank you, Christian, as always. And folks, any questions and the like, do follow up with us. Always there's information on how to contact. I hope this was informative, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you, as always, for coming out to listen to our podcast. Take care.